then, okay, well, I think it's age before beauty. So I think you might have to start.
Right, age before beauty. Well, you can tell he's a writer. Never afraid of a cliche. Well,
you can always cut it like you've done to the best scenes, eh?
Yes, well, we'll cut that bit later, when he's not here. We're really pleased to say hello to the Writers Guild in France, and particularly pleased to say a couple of words because it is rare that writers and directors are seen as equally important in the creation of whatever stuff we do. And for me, without wishing to embarrass the man sitting next to me, the writer is the starting point, is the first creative act in making a film. And we've always valued being alongside each other. Oh Christ! Go on, take it.
Well, see, well, it isn't the starting point, which I think is interesting, because this morning we've just been over a very difficult cup of coffee, as writers and directors must do. Visit a good cafe. It's the conversations that nourish the story, isn't it? You know, and I think it is like a quirky process. But I think you have to be really in sync with each other. And I think the one thing I really have learned from you over the years really is that the most important question is the why of the story. I mean, I think that's critical. Although we're taking the piss here, I mean, if you don't nail that and ask yourself the really tough question, of all the millions of options, this wonderful life that we confront and all its contradictions, is to say, why this story? And I think conversations around that, even before we get to the script, are absolutely critical.
Yes, no, I think that's right, and I guess our conversations arise out of a shared view of the world. So, what's important in the world that we see around us, the conflicts that are there, how society develops. What are the tensions within society? What are the injustices? What are the stories that illustrate those? What gets us out of bed in the morning to be angry or to laugh or to care about something, or to occupy our minds? What hits us when we're having breakfast that thinks, wow, I'd really want to know more about that? And then you exchange those ideas and those thoughts, maybe a text or an email, because Paul lives in a foreign country. Paul lives in Scotland, you see, and I live in England, and so we exchange messages from the sublime to the ridiculous,
from a safe distance. Yeah.
Yes, and out of that, all that mixture of messages, then we'll meet, we'll have a conversation, and out of those chats, then as an interest will develop in a particular subject, and out of that interest then you start finding stories, and out of the stories you find characters, and Paul usually finds the central character and the central dilemma, and following that we'll write some notes which are the sketch of two or three characters and the sketch of two or three incidents that should contain the essential conflict or the essential dilemma that illustrates the whole, and that's the first critical stage. After the general discussion, that's the first critical stage, isn't it? It's identifying the central characters and the central conflict, out of which you illustrate the core of the subject.
Yes, and I think this is the great advantage of sharing things, really, because I find it very useful, like to say, to put something on paper, because you can talk for a long time, and that's really, really important because it informs the decisions. But actually, by putting something down on paper, it just concentrates the mind. It just gives a sense of the world, the central conflict, the possible characters. And what I find really, really useful, and I think that's the wonderful thing of, you know, sharing this work. And because I think a writer and director do very different things, very different jobs, but what they do is they meet in the middle as filmmakers, and our loyalty, both of us, is to the film. And I think that's it's really, really important to learn that. So if you're not joined at the hip, you know, and share the same thing, it would be a recipe for endless conflict, I think. I think we've always been lucky because we've always started together and tried to be our own toughest critics, you know, and sometimes, you know, in the process of writing, things will change, you know, drastically because you're ambushed by the characters of the situation. But then we can go back again and just talk to each other and say, well, is this the best choice? And sometimes you can, you know, sense something that's a wonderful idea which is outrageous. You know, both of us do that, but we both listen and just try and think it through. So the idea of sharing that, you know, is really, really important. But what's also, which I really appreciate working with Ken, is too, and you do this with actors, you do this with every process in the film, you're doing it now with George, who's with the music. You can't just give someone orders to do things. It has to come from the different talents that each person has in the process. So I never feel I'm writing to order. I feel like great freedom. But then when we come back again to talk about it, this having a close collaborator who is a really tough critic, I think is really, really important, because, you know, sometimes in a film you can see massive gaps in something and you really feel that should have been dealt earlier within the script. So to be totally rigorous and bloodthirsty almost, without losing generosity, is a fine balance.
I hadn't thought of it quite in terms of blood, but and I think, I mean, the process is, is, I guess, as you would expect, is that Paul will put down a sketch of a character, a few characters and an essential conflict and development. Then we'll talk about that. Then Paul will write a first draft, and that's usually quite quick. It usually takes you 4 or 5 weeks, maybe. He's quite quick.
Depending on the kids.
Depends on his kids, yeah. So it's usually quite quick, 4 or 5 weeks for a first draft, which in my experience is very quick. But it's good because the groundwork has been done in the way Paul said, and so then it's just getting it all down on paper, and out of that we'll then meet and discuss it again, and then there's several drafts after that, maybe up to 6 or 7 maybe. It depends really from project to project.
It depends. Some projects seem to land in our laps, you know. Like looking for Eric, the wonderful Eric Cantona, who I'm sure you'll all know. But then there's other ones where, and I think this is another important point really, is like for example like Daniel Blake, for instance. It's against the Kafkaesque world of, you know, bureaucracy and welfare. But there was just so much material there and so many worlds and so many options. So, I mean, the writing maybe didn't take so long, but the research process for that was really 6 months of intensive, almost journalistic work, which was really, really vital. And it was very, very useful for me to go and dig in, for example, find the whistleblowers inside the organisation we were looking at, talk to people in food banks. Ken and myself travelled the country, going along, speaking to people in food banks, because there's one thing imagining something, but when you actually see someone who's hungry, who's humiliated, who tells a story of the pain when their children don't have food, when you see that in someone's eye, you don't forget it, and it gives you something inside, you know, and that really informs the writing and the whole project. So there was a lot of digging around, many options, and again, doing that journalistic investigative work, and I always say to kind of speak to young screenwriters, you know, never underestimate listening to people. It sounds very, very obvious. It doesn't mean you're going to find a script off the street, but what you will find is, if you listen and people talk about their lives, they'll tell you stories that are way beyond your imagination. This doesn't limit your choices, it increases the choices and the ideas that might pass through your mind. So I think listening, and so I find when I do this, for example, the 6 months we did coming back, sharing that with you, talking about it again, you know, it helps just inform all the choices. And this is way before the screenplay is ever written.
I think one thing arising out of that is that it's the fashion now for film directors to write their own scripts. And I think this is, I mean, there may be one or two geniuses who can do this, but by and large this is a big mistake. And the whole auteur theory that it relies on one person to do everything is just a kind of egotistical fraud. Because you see most films where the director's written the script and the script is too thin, because the director's been thinking in terms of pictures and images before the content is really developed and tested and argued through and considered and enriched. And that's the problem. So they go too quickly and say, oh, wouldn't it be good to have this scene, and wouldn't it be good to have that shot, and I've seen a good shot here, and it's too thin. And what is greatly undervalued is the depth of character you need in the writing, the complexity of the narrative to bring out the essential story through the interaction or the conflict, and the establishing the premise, the cumulative events, the resolution of the story, or the partial resolution, or however you want to end it, and the satisfaction of that. And the language is hugely undervalued in film, and most dialogue you see in films is so thin, it's so simply there as a mechanism for an event to happen. But the richness of dialogue is really important, and it's been important for us because we've mainly told working class stories, and working class people have dialects. Dialects have particular use of language, particular comedy, which implies a view of the world. And if you don't respect the language and the richness of language that people use, you're cutting the value of what you do by half. You know, because writers are dramatists, and think of the great dramatists. The language is their medium. Undervalue language and you undervalue cinema. Over to you.
I'm stuck for words.
Oh, the other thing. No, go on, your turn.
I just wish all my fellow screenwriters out there the luck I've had in the collaboration I've had with both Ken and with the Thea Boyin, Spanish director. And maybe I'll tell you this one little story. People think I've got the most fantastic agent because my name is alongside Ken's on the posters. I don't have an agent, and that comes from my brother here, and it happens with the Thea too. And I mean, it seems obvious that when you're working so closely with someone, that you would feel respected. But the very fact, I remember when I first met Ken, and we were going to talk about a story. He says, I said, I'll nip down to London. He says, no, I'm coming to see you in Glasgow. I says, don't be daft, you're much busier than me. He says, no, from the earliest days, I've always followed the writer. And I was kind of stunned by that. And you came up to Glasgow and you saw me before I'd ever written a script. And so it's not the best agent, it's just that some people have got something in them. So I'll never take that for granted.
Well, I mean, yes, it was quite funny, really, wasn't it? Because it was in Gardner Street in Glasgow. I remember it well. I helped you clean up, I think, didn't I? I think we washed a few pots, really, because it was in a state. Anyway,
there was a draft from the window. You kept holding your neck.
Oh, yeah.
You're going, you're going to get that window fixed. We're going to work together.
But the other thing is that I think is really important to say, and we've gone on too long now. The other thing is that the writer's work doesn't stop when you hand the script over, because we keep talking. The next biggest issue after the script is the writing. The next biggest question is who is going to bring these characters to life, and so obviously that's a decision you want to share. So we work with a brilliant casting director called Carleen Crawford, and Carleen and I start seeing people together, then Carly will often see a lot of people on her own, and we get a short list, or we start improvising with possible actors or non-actors or whoever we think will be good. And then Paul comes along to some of the casting, and it helps us define the characters we're looking for. And certainly when we get to the final choices, I wouldn't dream of doing it without Paul there and Rebecca, the producer, in the room, and we discuss it together, and Carlin, of course, because that's the most decisive questions you have to answer. Who's going to bring these people to life? And we've all got to be happy with it. And often someone will see something that the other person doesn't see. Someone will see something that I don't see. So that's central. And also to be there for the shooting, when Paul can sort his...
I make the tea usually, but never mind.
Yes.
I'm going to do something useful.
But we'll come along. And again, when you're shooting, you're all the time, you've got to concentrate on absolutely making the mechanics of the shot happen. And sometimes Paul will see something in the interaction between the characters that doesn't quite, isn't quite in the centre of what we're after. So, quiet word, and I really need that. I'm really pleased to hear that, because it might mean you need to do another take or another couple of takes, but that's easy. I mean, sometimes it's, you're running short of time and it's not so easy, but by and large it's easy, and you need to know. You need to have that input. And sometimes it'll come from a cameraman, we work with a brilliant cameraman, and he'll say, I'm not quite getting something that I'm expecting in a shot. So the one or two close people concerned with the actual core of how the film's developing, it's really valuable to have other eyes on what you're doing. And it's not a threat. It really isn't a threat. And you sometimes hear of directors who don't want writers around, but it's their insecurity. That's what they're revealing, their insecurity, because if they're secure in what they're doing, you welcome another eye. Just watching things that you're missing. So it's really, and then of course in the cutting room, you need, certainly as soon as we've got a cut that's roughly in shape, Paul and I will see it, Paul and Rebecca and I will see it with no one else. And that's when we say, now, is the centre of what we were after in the film? And then obviously there's various refinements we do. So it continues throughout. It's maybe an obvious thing to say, but it's really central to say it. It's really important to say it. It's so that when we sign off on the film, we've signed it off, and so there are no nasty surprises really, and that's really essential. The collaboration continues from the first cup of coffee combined with the football scores down to the finished print.
And in a strange way, just to, I suppose, finish the cycle too, what we've always treated very, very seriously is the debate after the film.
Oh, absolutely.
And the debate with the audience. We never take an audience's reaction for granted. It's a massive battle to get a film made. It's an amazing amount of talent and energy and finance that goes into it. So we really try to defend the film, but also what's really, really important, and I suppose is the spark for the first place, is why we get so mad at things, is to engage in the debate. And in every film we've had very strong opposition to many of our films, and also great support. But that debate and the discussion of those ideas, and the little bit of reality we've perhaps played with, hopefully we'll have a much bigger echo and examine really important questions about how power operates and affects our life. Who has power, who hasn't, and how do we try and engage with the possibility of change, which is it sounds mechanistic, but it's the thing that informs the writing and the stories and all this effort, and a great deal of the mischief as well.
Yeah. You've probably fallen off your chairs with with boredom by now. So
Yeah, for half of it at least. Yeah.
So anyway, thanks for listening. If you are still listening, if you've turned off, never mind. We'll raise a glass to writers and au revoir.
Au revoir. All the best to the Old Alliance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Old Alliance, that's Scotland and France.
Scotland, France. Well, you're the one that called me a stranger. Cheers, lads.
Okay.
Good luck.
Cheers.
Good luck to everyone.
A bientôt.